What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, today's video, I'm going to be talking about Immortal X-Men number 13 by Kieran Gillen and Lucas Wernick. This issue features very heavily the fallout of the Quiet Council being forced, effectively, by Colossus demanding a vote to release the Sinister files. We are seeing in this issue the sum result of that. And honestly, this is probably one of the most damning things that Krakoa has had to deal with as of late. This is something I even talked about in the previous video for Immortal X-Men number 12, that releasing the Sinister files, which effectively would tell all of humanity about what happened during the sins of Sinister, despite the fact that that reality had been completely negated and undone. The idea here is that Colossus, by the request of Mikhail Rasputin, having the Chronicler control Colossus into calling for this vote, this will sow nothing but fear, suspicion, and doubt into humanity regarding mutants, putting humans in a position to hate and fear mutants more than they probably ever have. Now humanity knows that the Krakoan mutants had taken over the world in an alternate reality. They had subjugated humanity and made everything mutant. Even though technically it wasn't even really Krakoa as a whole, it all really came down to one mutant, and that was Sinister. Sinister infected pretty much everything. No one was acting of their own free will in this, but that's not how humanity chooses to see it. Humanity is being given the whole story, and yet they're still blaming mutant kind as a whole rather than blaming the one person who was responsible for it and effectively punished for it. Humanity isn't focusing on the fact that there were mutants who fought back against this to restore everything back to the way it is currently. They're just hyper-focusing on the fact that mutant kind won, and that's all they really care about. Not only does humanity hate and fear mutants now more than ever, but now there are people who are scared for their children. Remember, during the events of Judgment Day, one of the things that happened in the aftermath of that event is that Jean Grey had enacted what was called the Phoenix Foundation. This was Jean Grey pushing an effort for the Five to use a small portion of their time spent resurrecting mutants to resurrect humans who had died from unnatural causes or from just very unfortunate events. This wasn't meant to just bring back any old human willy-nilly. It was mostly meant to bring back children who had died untimely deaths. And now, because of the release of the Sinister files and the idea that mutants who had been resurrected could potentially be infected with the Sinister gene and be taken over and become Sinisters, now humanity is worried they could be taken over in the same way. And the fact that no mutant can give humanity a straight answer as to whether or not this could or couldn't happen, because remember, just a couple of issues ago, we learned that there was the potential, just the smallest potential, that the Sinister gene could still be inside of Emma Frost, Professor Xavier, Exodus, and Hope. And it's even been used as a method to keep them from having votes on the Quiet Council, and was even more recently used on Destiny when Mother Righteous had influenced Mystique into killing her, so that when she was resurrected, Destiny would have no vote because she would have been believed to be compromised. Humanity is just thinking, well, if it happened to them, why wouldn't it happen to us? And that is sowing yet more fear and doubt. Now, not only are they fearing for the children's lives, humanity is also fearing for their very own when it comes to their health, because one of the biggest things that Krakoa had enacted when House of X started was Krakoan medicines. Medicines that could extend human life by 5 years. Medicines that could cure pretty much any mental ailment, and also drugs that can help cure any physical ailment. These drugs have saved countless lives across the Marvel Comics universe. However, humanity is now backing off of that, because now, with the fear that the resurrection that was being given to humans could potentially be tainted, now people are no longer wanting to deal with the Krakoan medicines. And while technically this actually hurts Orcus's plan to use those tainted Krakoan drugs, the drugs that they have tainted themselves and use against humanity to trigger their fight or flight responses thanks to MODOK, this actually is too little too late, because really the only thing this is gonna hurt is Krakoa's bottom line. Krakoan medicines is, for all intents and purposes, the sole money-making force on Krakoa, and if no one is buying those Krakoan medicines, this means that the Hellfire Trading Company is not getting any money. And if the Hellfire Trading Company is not getting any money, guess who else is not getting any money? And that's Krakoa. The Hellfire Trading Company is actually instrumental in keeping Krakoa afloat. It was the whole reason why Sebastian Shaw was brought on in the first place, was to help sell those Krakoan medicines in what was originally deemed black market type scenarios. And then eventually he moved on to pushing those same drugs just unilaterally across the globe, while Emma Frost led the face of Hellfire Trading Company on the more legitimate side of things. And well, since then she has stepped down, and the Stepford Cuckoos are running the business with former Hellfire Club member Lord Chantel at the helm. But yeah, all that's a native saying, Krakoa ain't got no money, which is very interesting when you think about the timeliness of this, because you have Tony Stark on one side who is broke right now and is marrying Emma Frost, who technically has all the money in the relationship as of this moment, and now come to find out Emma has no money either. It's two broke people trying to build something, and I find it very endearing. Now, going back to humanity's reinvigorated hatred and fear of mutants was, in a lot of ways, confirmation bias. Now, for those that don't know what confirmation bias is, it's effectively one's gravitation towards knowledge and information that basically confirms things that you already believe, regardless of whether or not those things are true. People already feared that mutant kind was going to take over the world, and guess what? All this did was reaffirm their suspicions, despite the fact that it didn't happen quite the way that they thought it was going to happen. All of this has led to a perfect storm for the fall of X, but the fall of X is not just necessarily the fall of mutant society. It's not just about the fall of mutants from grace in the eyes of humanity, and it's not just about the fall of their stock prices, and you could even say it's not just about mutants being killed off, but there are a lot of things that kicked off in this issue as a direct result of the Sinister files being unleashed. We learned that Krakoa itself is dying. Now, Krakoa is a psionic vampire of sorts. Krakoa needs life energy to survive, and that was kind of the reason why back in the day when Krakoa was first introduced in 1975's Giant Size X-Men #1, that Krakoa was an island that any mutant who went to it just died, that Krakoa was a death sentence for any mutant who went there. It was why Charles Xavier had to go and get a whole other team of X-Men to go save his original X-Men, and why we learned later that another team of X-Men actually went in before that. It was because when mutants go to Krakoa, it feeds off their energy, especially since mutants tend to have even more energy to feed off of than normal humans. And Krakoa needs that energy to thrive. Now, when Krakoa feeds off of a mutant, it needs so much energy that if it feeds off of one mutant, or maybe even 4 or 5 mutants, it would probably kill them to get the energy that it needed. But we learned after the events of House of X that Krakoa just takes a little bit here and there of the millions upon millions of mutants who already live on the island. And since it's only taking just a small piece of each individual mutant, each mutant doesn't feel really a thing. The most they might feel is a slight headache, if that, but it doesn't kill anyone. And we learned this was a plan that was put in place for most energy vampires on the island. Characters like Emplate and Selene having selective feeding moments where they're allowed to take a little bit from a lot of people to ensure that they are still allowed to live as well, because their powers force them to do so in order to survive. Krakoa is not getting that energy anymore because you have not hit that like button yet. I know, it sounds crazy, but without your likes on this video, specifically this video, and really any other video that I put out, Krakoa can't survive. If each and every person who watches this video clicks the like button, that is one less meal that Krakoa has to go without. It is also helpful to Krakoa's well-being if you also click that subscribe button, because I know for a fact at least 39% of everyone who is watching my videos is not subscribed to this channel. And if we could just convert, I don't know, even 20% of those people who are not subscribed, we could push my channel to 100. I mean, it almost got me. We could feed Krakoa for an entire year and also get my channel to 100,000 subscribers. But in all seriousness, because people have lost faith in Krakoa to the point where they're not willingly giving their energy over to Krakoa, and because Krakoa has taken on this more symbiotic relationship with mutant kind, it's not just forcefully taking what it needs to survive. This is why the leaves are falling off and rotting from Krakoa, because it is dying. The mutants living on Krakoa have lost faith because they have seen their best laid plans thrown into the wind. They have seen that while Charles Xavier's dream, or rather his new dream of uplifting mutant kind to the point where they're above humanity and have their own place, it's not working out, because as we've talked about in previous other comics, actually more specifically in Victor Laval's Sabretooth series, I've talked about how Krakoa is more for some, not for all. The idea that mutants that are often referred to as Morlocks, mutants whose X gene is more obvious due to how it twists and distorts their looks so that they can't blend in with normal human society, that is something that's been a huge point of contention as of late on the island. The fact that mutants who are considered Morlocks are treated differently than mutants who can pass as normal, even on an island where everyone is a mutant. We've talked about this even in Vita Ayala's New Mutants, where something similar came up. The idea that some mutants weren't really as welcome as others on the island. Even some who used to have villainous past were treated differently just because of who they used to be versus who they're trying to become. All of this on top of the litany of lies and infighting and essentialism, as well as a tremendous lack of accountability on the part of the Quiet Council, has led to this happening. Now, the biggest culprit, and this is something Cypher reveals to us, is the creation of the Pit in House of X number 6. The idea that the Quiet Council created a place for bad mutants to go when they do something bad, it put a very negative spin on things for a lot of people on Krakoa, feeling like, wow, we finally have a chance to be the best versions of ourselves, but if we're too good at being ourselves, we're gonna get put in timeout. Now, this is where it's revealed, and this is something I feel like we as readers knew for a long time, but the Quiet Council, more specifically Charles Xavier, did not know. And it's the Cypher finally tells Charles the truth about the Pit. The fact that he's never made the Pit anything like what Charles wanted it to be. The idea that it was supposed to be a place where you feel nothing, you see nothing, you experience nothing, you effectively exist in nothingness until the time that the Quiet Council deems it you're allowed to go free. But the truth is, and we learned this in Victor Laval's Sabretooth series, is that Cypher was not allowing that to happen. This is why Sabretooth was able to exert his will over Krakoa to create a hellscape in the underbelly of Krakoa, and what effectively had kind of turned a part of Krakoa against itself. The other mutants that were put in from the Hellions, like Orphan Maker and Nanny, and how Toad during Trial of Magneto, how those characters were put into the Pit, as well as the other characters from the Sabretooth series like Oya and Necra, Madison Jeffries, Melter, and Third Eye. None of those characters are in the Pit anymore. And I even briefly talked about in another video about how Nature Girl is no longer in the Pit after the events of X-Men Green. And I always talked about how I wonder if anyone's ever gonna notice there's no one in the Pit like they're supposed to be. All of those characters I just mentioned, Sabretooth included, are all outside of the Pit. And Cypher even points out, just like how we learned in the Bishop War College series, that the only mutants that are down there are the Von Struckers, effectively the Fenris twins, and Mr. Sinister. That's 3 mutants only. And that the only people Cypher has ever inflicted the mandate of Charles Xavier on in the Pit is Charles Xavier, as well as Emma Frost, Exodus, and Hope when they were put in the Pit after the events of Sins of Sinister. Those 4 mutants, not even Sinister or the Fenris twins, 3 of the worst people in all of mutant kind in existence, even they didn't get the nothingness that Charles wanted for Sabretooth and anyone else who went into the Pit. But no, Cypher saved that punishment for Charles Xavier, and not even Charles Xavier alone. This was due to Cypher's disillusionment with the Quiet Council because he's sat back and watched, and he has found Krakoa's leadership wanting. We know that he doesn't care particularly for Krakoa's leadership if you go back to Jonathan Hickman's Inferno, and it's also here where he finally reveals to Xavier that he was the one who let Moira McTaggart get away, that he was the one who released her from Krakoa before Destiny and Mystique could kill her, and would have effectively stopped any of this Orcus business, or at least slowed it down enough before it could get to this point. Now, what is this all leading to? It's leading to Cypher calling for the dissolution of the Quiet Council. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the Quiet Council is just going away all entirely, but Cypher believes the Quiet Council as it is today no longer needs to exist. And oddly enough, he's not the only one who believes this. Now, initially, a lot of people do seem to be against this idea, with only Cypher, Xavier, and Hope Summers, Emma Frost, and Kate Pride as well, seeming to be the only people who are just dead set on board with this from the get-go. No one really says or enforces any ideas that they're against this, really, other than Sebastian Shaw and Destiny, and for two very different reasons. Shaw doesn't want this to be a thing because he feels like he finally has power on the Quiet Council now that he has Selene as well as Colossus and his 2 extra votes in his back pocket. Destiny doesn't want this to go through because she's seen something that lets her know that this is going to lead to the end. And while everything here is being done with the best of intentions on Cypher's part, no one really truly knows what's coming for Krakoa. The only person who really knows is Destiny. And while she has technically tried to warn everyone, no one's really listening to her. And technically, she hasn't been incredibly clear about what is coming because she can't directly tell people about the future. Otherwise, it won't happen. It's why over on the Rogue and Gambit side of things, she has only told Rogue that Manifold is the key, that if Manifold falls, Krakoa falls. Now, once the vote is actually called into question, yeah, sure, Exodus doesn't think that it's the greatest idea ever to use a human concept to try and solve a mutant problem, but like Cypher tells him, this itself is a human concept. The idea that you could create a utopia and that it would last forever, that is more human than everything else that they're doing right now. And when the vote is actually passed, the only one who is against it is Destiny now. And that is because Destiny knows what's coming, because as soon as the vote is passed, the island of Krakoa snatches Doug and hides him within what is presumably the pit to protect Doug from everything that is coming, because as we know, the Fall of X kicks off with the Hellfire Gala, which we will be seeing the events of that within the next couple of weeks. So everything that's happening right now is in aid of protecting Doug from whatever fallout is about to come, because Krakoa does feel like Cypher's life is in danger. And honestly, I would say it's probably to protect Cypher from them. Now, from what we know, Destiny has no idea what comes next. She says that the only thing she can see is a blinding white nothing. There is no future now going forward that she can see. Now, something tells me she probably will eventually start to see something, because events like this weren't necessarily supposed to unfold this way, most likely. So everything is resetting, and she's basically gonna, over time, probably get some ideas of what's going to happen. But as of right now, she sees nothing. Another thing that happens in this is pretty interesting. This is something that myself and Brian from Comic Breakdown had talked about in our Before the Fall recap live stream. And if you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend, go check it out. I'll try and remember to link it right up here. You can go check that out. It's a great conversation. And one of the things that he and I both talked about, and we were both kind of the same mind on this, is that resurrection for mutant kind is probably going to be off the table for a while. And technically speaking, the thing that would have put that into motion didn't actually come to pass. But now I begin to wonder, because in this, when Shaw is protesting the idea of dissolving the Quiet Council and starting a new one, Hope Summers does point out that if they do not pass a vote to disband the Quiet Council and reform a new one with new people who are not on that Fox News BS, she says that the 5 are on strike, meaning that they are not going to be resurrecting anyone. Now, the vote actually does come to pass, so technically the 5 are not on strike, so we don't have to worry about that. But something tells me still something is going to happen that's going to take mutant resurrection completely off the table. If you enjoyed this video, do the YouTube thing, like, share, comment, subscribe, and make sure you tap that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of the videos that I put out. Speaking of, if you want to check out that conversation I talked about with Brian from Comic Breakdown, check out this video right here. And if you want to learn more about how Colossus wound up with 2 extra votes on the Quiet Council, check out this video right here. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and until next time, let me know what you thought about Immortal X-Men number 13. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.